Hey patrons, in today's tutorial we will be doing a value study with Payne's Gray. Now this is a sketch that I have already drawn. This is based on a photo that I've taken in Bali a few years ago. This photo is available for download. The download link is in the video description below. So if you want to follow along, you may have to practice drawing this particular scene first and then color it later on. So I'm going to start by showing you the tools that I'll be using today. I'll be using this tube of Payne's Gray from Daniel Smith. By the way, I have created a video on Payne's Gray on my YouTube channel, so you may want to check that out to give you more information about this color. And these are the two brushes that I'll be using today. This is a squirrel brush and this is a sable brush. I'm using a squirrel brush to color large areas and the sable brush to paint in the details. Here's a closer look at the sketch. This sketch is not that detailed. If you just want to do a value study, you don't have to sketch out something that is really detailed because that is not the focus of the study. The study is to practice values, practice painting, see how you can capture the light and shadow, how you can capture the contrast accurately. And the more practice you have, the better you will be. So in today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how I'm going to do that study. In today's tutorial, there will be a lot of glazing. Now before we start, let's take a closer look at the photo. I'm going to leave all the white areas, the brightest areas, white. So I'm not going to paint over the paper. I'm going to leave the paper white at those areas, and those areas are this plastic bag, there's a fruit here. I'm not sure what this is. I think it's some coconut. I'm not what sure it is. But all the bright areas, all the white areas, I'm going to leave them white. I am not going to paint over. These are important areas, so remember not to paint over them. If you accidentally paint over them, you can quickly use some tissue paper or dry towel and just bring the paint out. When we do a value study, the colors are not that important. What is important is the contrast. So for example, here, a yellow shirt against a black bottom. The contrast is very strong. So what you want to do is to capture that contrast. And between this, the ground and the yellow shirt, if the contrast, if you don't understand the contrast, if you don't know which one is lighter, which one is darker, they are probably of the same contrast. But in this case, I think the ground, since it's black, it's lighter, though it's still slightly darker compared to the shirt. Now in certain instances, certain situations, the ground can be brighter than even black. So that's something to take note of. Only in certain situations, but you have to base it on your own observation. Here we have darker values. Here you see lighter values. This is not bright white, so I'm going to paint over with a very light wash of Payne's Gray. But this is still quite light, so I don't want to have it too dark. But this is light against black. We have light against black. Basically, we are just comparing light against darker values against much darker values. Just compare everywhere we go. All right, let's start. I'm going to create a very light wash. I'm going to use a lot of water because this is going to cover a large part of the sketch. So pay attention to the lighted areas. Remember, do not cover the white areas that you are supposed to leave as white. I am using a lot of water. So it may look that, oh, it may seem that this person is so dark, but it doesn't matter. The color is going to dry lighter later on, and anything that is not bright white should be covered with paint. This is the tricky part. So I have to color within this tiny area here. If you want to switch to a smaller brush, you can do so. So remember this bottom here, this is supposed to be black, but I'm going to color it with a light wash first. And dress, it's going to be light as well. I'm going to paint over with Payne's gray as well. If you can see colors, you are probably going to need to paint over it. Make sure you color and paint over all the areas that are supposed to have color, that are supposed to be shaded. This is the first wash. Now I'm going to wait for this to dry before I paint the second layer, before I glaze over with the second layer. This has almost dried, so now let's paint the second layer. So for the second layer, we are going to look for mid-tones, tones that are quite dark but not close to black. For example, here you can see that this is really dark, but this is not close to black. Black would be something like this part here, which is very difficult to see what color it is. That is black. This part here, it's very difficult to see what color it is. Here as well, there are some blacks. It's very difficult to see color. So these are black areas. But for everything else, it's going to be slightly darker. This is a light mid-tone, a very light wash. Now we are going to paint a slightly darker mid-tone. I'm going to work myself from left to right. So we're going to color. Now sometimes if you make mistakes, it's okay, just let it be. If you try to cover your mistake, it's going to make it worse. Like I think I probably made a mistake here. Try to paint carefully. When you are painting, always be comparing like, is this darker compared to this? If it's darker, just paint another layer over it. So just go around. For example, see this place here? See this fruit here? This was colored with one light wash. And this here, this basket here, this is darker compared to this, so I need to paint this darker compared to this. So this is the one wash that I painted earlier, and now I need to paint the basket a bit darker. So just do that for all the other areas. Just compare, is this darker than the earlier wash? If it is, then paint it darker. This may look dark, but it's actually not black. It's really fun to do this sort of studies because you can paint them very quickly, and it's very good practice as well. Because what this does is it helps train your eye, and not just that, it also helps you capture contrast. With painting, with art, what you want is actually contrast. So for example, here I want the contrast between this lady and the background, so I painted the background a bit darker. Sometimes you can use your own artistic artistic interpretation to paint. For example, if the background is of the same value as this person, sometimes you may want to just paint the background a bit darker so that you can get a contrast instead of painting what you actually see. So you don't really have to follow exactly what you see. What you see is just it's just a reference. You can sometimes break the rules. Don't paint what you see. Use your own artistic impression at times when it's helpful. If you think that you have made a mistake, like for example, this is definitely a bit too dark, quickly dry it up before it dries, before the paint dries. If not, it's going to be too dark. So what I want here is just a slightly darker value. I have just washed my brush. I'm going to fade this into the white of the paper because there is no hard edge here. So what I want is to fade some of this color into the white of the paper. So now the second wash is completed, and now I'm going to paint the really dark areas, the areas that are black or close to black. And that would be this part here, the pants that this lady is wearing. I'm going to use the paint in concentration. Make sure you get the shape correctly. Once you get the shape correctly, it will look like a nice shape. So there are some lines here. The line is actually thinner than this, so mistake. Let me just clean that up. So it's very challenging to paint if you do not have a thin brush. Try to get that in one smooth, quick motion. It will make your sketch look more spontaneous. There is a rim around the basket that is black. This fruit here, the bottom of this fruit, this is close to black, and here as well, this is very close to black. The value fits from black to mid gray, so we want to fit that in. I've added some clean water to this brush, so that's why it's fading like this. Now use tonal value studies, use value studies as a good opportunity to practice these sort of transitions. You see this person here, because I did not paint the shape correctly, now it doesn't look like, I mean it still looks like a person, but it doesn't look clearly like a person. So when you're painting, sometimes you have to be a bit more careful. Don't mess up the shape, because what you want is clarity. What you want is for people to look at your sketch and at one glance be able to tell that, oh hey, that's a person, that's a basket. And sometimes when you are painting large areas like this, for example, you may not want to have an even wash. Sometimes you want to have some variations in that wash to make it a bit more interesting. Like maybe you can create some textures for certain areas. You may want to drop in more paint. If you feel like there are some areas where you actually painted over accidentally, those areas are supposed to be whiter, you can use a white gel pen, or you can use white gouache to color back, bring back the highlights to those places. And here I want this rim here, this rim of the basket to be white. So I'm going to use this white gel pen to bring back some of the highlights. So this is the completed sketch. I only used 3 values. I used a light value, I use a mid-tone, and I use a dark value that is close to black. Now if you want to make your sketch, if you want to make your scene more realistic in terms of values, you can add more values within those 3 values. But that's going to take a lot more time, because it really will test your patience and your observation skills. But for quick sketches, you can just paint over very quickly. And this is something that I like to do once in a while, just to practice tonal values, just to practice getting the contrast right. If there's one point to take away from this lesson, it is just this: get the contrast right. So lighter values should be lighter compared to mid-tone values. Mid-tone values should be lighter compared to dark values. Get that contrast right. That is the most important thing to get right. Doing tonal studies is a fun way to paint, and it's also very good practice, especially to beginners. Let's take a look at some areas that are problematic. For example, this area here. Now, we have this dark, sharp area. You can see the sharp edges. This should not look like this. This should be black, fading into the mid-tone, because if you look at the reference photo, there is no dark line there, there's no sharp edge there, except for this line here at the bottom of the sleeve. So the sharp edge should be here, but not here. So this is something to take note of when you are painting. Sometimes you want to let the colors just feed into another color. Sometimes you can have the colors joined together. For example, here, the colors, they can join together in one large shape. And here as well, you can see this large color, this large shape here of the basket joining together with the bottom of the dress. Although from the reference photo, this is lighter compared to the dress. Some textures within this shape here to make it a bit more interesting, rather than a flat wash like this, which is not as interesting. You see some color transition here, value transition here as well, so that it's not a flat wash. This is a bit more interesting compared to this. So that's all for today's tutorial. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment section. I hope this video is helpful. See you in the next video. Bye!